Welcome back to the Daily Edge here with my brothers TJ and Todd Daly. Excited about this topic today, perception versus reality. It's clear that we all see things differently. I remember when we were younger, someone would say, well, how do you know this is a blue crayon? How do you know if the color blue that you're seeing is the same blue that you're seeing? It's the same blue that you're seeing. I think that's a really good question. I think a lot plays into our perception, both visually and cognitively, and how that translates into our own realities. So I'm going to kick this over to Todd to get us started.
I would say over the last decade, I have been so fascinated at the situations I've been in professionally and personally of people that have experienced the same situation factually, but have come away with unbelievably different perceptions of the situation. Like, not like, oh, this person kind of thought this. I mean, like, if you were in two rooms hearing the stories, you would have no idea that they were actually like in the same situation. So vastly different, drastically different. The brain's ability to fill in details, make assumptions, jump to conclusions, and create a reality that I'll call a perception is fascinating. And I guess growing up, I never really understood that. I always felt like, look, if we're all experiencing the same world, this is a brown table, those are, decorative, whatever. And the reality is, like, I'm to the point now where I'm not sure exactly what you guys see. If you see a brown circular table, obviously I'm exaggerating and poking fun a little bit, but I have been blown away. And I think we see this, and media has taken full advantage of it because they've realized they can fabricate and manipulate to have people perceive the world a certain way, Republican versus Democratic, and it's incredible. I'm really fascinated.
It's very interesting how, the basis of all of this is language, right? And it's what language we assign to our perceptions. And it's interesting how it's been co-opted over the years, and I think it contributes heavily to what you're talking about. I think that we've become more the more we're exposed to media, the more we're exposed to inputs, the more desensitized we become, and the more extreme things need to be communicated for it to resonate or for it to engage us at all. And so I think what's happened in a lot of instances is certain words have been bastardized and co-opted to the point that for certain people, we're talking about perception again, they mean different things. So one of those words is Nazi. To someone who lived through the Holocaust, that is the worst possible thing you can ever fathom. I cannot fathom it. You can't fathom seeing your loved ones burned in an oven or people shot on sight, yet it is used so freely today as like, a common descriptor for anybody who essentially in a lot of instances doesn't agree with a particular perspective, and you hear that word used on both sides. But there's so much of that's gone on, and it's gotten so extreme that I think that it's worth examining how language has been co-opted in that way. And then I think that the more you see, this goes back to, I guess, environmental variables, the more you see people who have come up in different environments, and again, what certain things mean to them, the more that informs maybe their perspective on some of these situations that have occurred.
Interestingly enough, Todd, when you're talking about now you've had several years in leadership, right? And as you have probably been in several situations where you've heard two sides of a story, and sometimes there's a third that no one's seen. I know that I've seen it. I'm curious, obviously not to give examples, but like take us through processing that. And what do you think the biggest influences are on perception for people? Is it their environment, as TJ mentioned? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of things that develop a storyline that basically predisposes the brain or positions the brain to fill in the gaps, right? Of someone's motive or why they did it, even how they did it in some cases. I think we all have varying backgrounds, experiences, biases that set the brain up to fill in the gaps in different ways. And I think that is what I've found is in a given situation that you experience together, there are way more gaps to be filled than what someone would initially instinctively suggest, right? So if you're sitting in a room and you're having a conversation and someone says, I would have done that differently. The person who did it is hearing, you're an idiot, right? And this person is potentially just saying, hey, I would have done that differently, right? Maybe giving them some constructive criticism of like, hey, here's a different way to do that, or think about that. And some of this goes into delivery, but there's so many, why did that person say that? What's their motive? Like, well, yeah, they told me that. They called me an idiot because such and such and such and such, and boom, like off it goes. I think it is a combination of factors, both recent and I think longer term that had been instilled, deeper seated, that helps fill the gaps.
Why do you guys think that we are wired inherently to jump to those conclusions versus tease them out through discussion? Right? Like most people, self included, that would be an initial reaction, especially with less life experience, right? Like that guy called me an idiot. I'm not even going to talk to him and wonder why. I'm going to make it my professional goal over the next year to destroy said person's career instead of just trying to understand. Why do you think we're wired that way?
Confirmation bias. And it's easier. Laziness and confirmation bias. And by confirmation bias, I mean we are all wired to seek things that we already believe. So if we thought that person was already out to get us and they just simply say, hey, I would have done that differently, that's confirmation bias. They're going to latch on to that. See, I told you so. And you see this all the time in politics. People taking advantage of that. But we have a confirmation bias as a human species that we really find ourselves latching on to things that we already believed or had hypothesized.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's two parts of this. There's the person that maybe is the communicator, but like how we receive stuff, I think is important too. And I think there's a disconnect. And I think we all want to, I believe, when we do something, which is as you get older, a lot of people don't like to try new things because we want to do it well, right? We want to do things well. We want to please people. And so any type of feedback, I don't know, and this would be interesting, could be we've gotten a little soft over time, but any type of feedback comes across as I didn't do it right, or I'm not good enough, and then I'm not valued, and then I'm not loved, right? Let's just go right down the chain. Do you think that that's changed over time, that we're just a more sensitive society? Or why do you believe, or would you disagree that feedback in general is something that is hard for people to take, that's not a natural...
It's the introduction of new communication mediums. If you were going to say something to somebody 50 years ago, you had to say it to their face for the most part. Maybe you could write them a letter, right? But now I think there are these different forms of communication that are readily available. I mean, they talk about it Joe Rogan talks about it a lot. We weren't meant to be in a situation where we could communicate to 10,000 people at one time in 30 seconds. Like that's not something that we, I think, fully as a species understand the gravity of when something like that happens. There was an individual that we're all friends with the other day. I'm not on Facebook much, but I did jump on, or maybe I saw it on Instagram and then moved over, that was talking about some of the things that have been going on, and that it was equating silence related to these current events directly to being silent during historically oppressive events. I'll be general with my statement. Basically saying, if you're quiet now, the people that are quiet now, they would have been quiet back when these other oppressive things were going on back in the day. And I found that really interesting because, again, I think that we've talked on prior podcasts about us, 99.9%, I think you can say with certainty that most people are humanitarians. So I'm sure, to your point earlier, that there was some positive reason that they did that they put that out there. But man, it's real hard to see that when essentially somebody is calling you a supporter of like a horrific historic event because
Like the Holocaust.
or slavery or whatever. Like, hey, if they're not talking now, they wouldn't have talked back then. They wouldn't have been if you look at, I'll be transparent. I look at my relationship or some of our relationships with this particular person historically, like we've always had their back, whoever this person was. We've always been good friends. We've always supported each other. They've supported us and vice versa. So, there's a factual element there that that is in front of you, but it's still hard, even knowing that, to not feel like they're attacking you and saying that you would have been somebody that would have supported one of those horrific events.
I think that's the sensitivity of that we have, is like by him saying that, it hits home and like, well, you're calling me this or that. And how we capture that, I think, is important. One of the things that I think we've done is we just haven't done a good job of, well, I would say I think we put things that are super important to us out there, and if they're not super important to other people, I know who you're talking about just by how you're describing it, but like, is it okay that your mission in life is not my mission in life? And so what I mean by that is like, well, in this instance where if you're not standing up for those people, my whole life is centered around racial equality, which I think is super important. And that's what I'm focusing on. And the bar now is if you're not saying anything, then you're part of the problem, not part of the solution. And we can either take offense to that, or we can say, I get why you're saying that. That's something you're passionate about, and that's what you believe. But that isn't the top priority for me. My priority is creating Christian environments in the workplace. And that's where I'm focused my time, energy, and effort. I can't take on every battle that you're taking on at the level and intensity that you're taking it on. So I think we've also lost a little bit of like, just because someone is super passionate about something, I don't believe we have to be as passionate and as vocal about said thing, especially if we're uninformed or we just don't feel like we've got the information to provide value to that. So that's something that I've also wrestled with, and I've had to ask myself, does it bother me because it's hitting close to home, or does it bother me that like I feel like I'm being asked to carry the same cross this person is based on what they've been called to do?
You hit on something there that I think is really important. And I think it's a step further than just saying this isn't a passion of mine. I don't have the time and energy to have the information necessary to form an opinion on certain things. And I think people need to be more mindful of the time and energy it takes to truly be well informed on a topic enough to share and make a statement or opinions about it that you're publicly trying to push people towards. I think a lot of people, due to confirmation bias, see something that they had a hypothesis about, they jump on it, and then the air horns start coming out. And I think that's super dangerous. And I will give you an example, like a lot of what's been going on with ICE. Okay. So ICE, I think at least a decent portion of the population understands the idea of securing borders, like, or having like borders. I think some disagree with that premise. And I think many of us disagree with the tone that's being set and how aggressively we're pursuing that. as you guys mentioned, in the spirit of being humanitarian. And for me, even the Pope has spoken out a lot about this. There have been, I will say, maybe a handful of situations with ICE officers that have been recorded, and people have immediately jumped to the idea that ICE is basically ripping people out of their homes in cities across the country and, ripping families apart, separating kids and parents, and just putting people on planes and shipping them places. And again, it's probably a number of situations that we've seen that we can count on our fingers, would be my guess. The reality is there's thousands and thousands of ICE agents that are out there, and I have no idea what the vast, vast majority of these people are doing, how they're conducting themselves, how it's actually being executed. I think people are really quickly, they see a few of these scenarios and boom, it's like fulfills my hypothesis. That's what I said, told you so. You're a Nazi, you voted for him, blood's on your hands, right? It's like very aggressive. And I think it's short of, my perception is that it's short of people doing the amount of research they need to be doing to actually understand what is happening on the whole. Mm-hmm. So this happened with Catholic priests. You had more than a handful of situations, but I think there's several 100,000 Catholic priests in the world, and there were some very bad eggs doing some super bad things. There were police officers, right? Half a decade ago, that was the thing. They were videoing police officers. You got hundreds of thousands of police officers across the country. There's going to be 10 of them, and it basically an entire society wanted to stop having police officers, wanted to defund the police. There are firefighters doing the same thing. There are I can guarantee you there are dozens and dozens of teachers out there who are verbally abusing students, who are crushing confidence, who are talking with them and potentially even physically abusing them in some cases. And if the right people got a hold of that and put that out there, it could have an effect of demonizing. Now, fortunately, I think it would take more because people have such an appreciation for what teachers do. But you can demonize an entire profession these days with 10 scenarios because of our brain's desire to just hear what we already think, and then people run with it. And I think, to me, that's disappointing. So for me, on some of this ICE stuff, I do feel like I just feel like the president and the administration's tone on how aggressively they're pursuing this is wrong. What I am, my pause and my silence is really an offering of humility, that just because I've seen 5 videos of 10,000 ICE officers that are out there, that I'm going to jump to the conclusion that everyone's being ripped out of their homes across the country and people who are just great, good standing citizens. I mean, maybe that is happening. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I don't have the time to really formulate a well-informed opinion and then try and go out and influence the world on it. So I do think there's something really powerful to, we only have so much capacity. And I think if we're not well-informed on something, we got to be very careful with how we approach it.
I think it's important to reinforce what you said. And it's that you're not saying that it's happening one way or the other. You're saying that, again, there are consequences for any analysis that you put out in the public domain. I do tend to agree with you. And I think, again, from a humanitarian perspective, most people do when it comes to the tone that things are being handled with. If there were instances, hypothetically, where we'll, again, use this as an example, ICE were to go out and get somebody, there was a serial killer, and they found out that said serial killer had met the qualifications for a violent criminal from who knows where. And 10 of those things were picked up and conveyed via particular, then you'd have potentially a different perspective. But I think it is important to understand. I don't think a lot of people think about that because there's either historical environmental experiences that people have had, and or there is a point of success that I think people, and I think it's more aligned with, maybe it's more aligned with power, or maybe it's exposure. There's a level that people get to where there's this like nurturing, mothering tendency. And so it's always the perceived meek that are in need of support, right? And we talk about what could happen from a negative perspective when you jump to conclusions. It's like, you're right. Let's say, and I don't know the number, let's say there's 50,000 ICE agents out there and these things are happening. And again, our government is not doing a great job by pouring more gasoline on this fire. But what happens to the people who are that are in these roles that are getting doxxed because of, people's desire or lack of desire to really get to the bottom of things and to really understand what's broadly happening? Somebody could be in some state that's way away from wherever, a lot of this stuff had occurred in Minnesota over the last couple of weeks. Somebody could be in Virginia just doing some random, non-invasive, tactical maneuver in terms of bringing something in or addressing a situation. And, they could face physical harm and physical violence because somebody saw something on X a couple of weeks ago and didn't do their due diligence. So there's also the other side of this that could be thrown into harm's way because somebody's reacting a little bit too quickly to something.
It's really fascinating to think there's a percentage of negativity or moral injustice in just about everything. There's a percentage. And as you kind of indicated, Todd, what society has allowed us to do with phones and video cameras and stuff is capture more of that. We as a society thrive on the negative. I mean, newspapers, when they were relevant, they used to send out stories with, the headlines, and then obviously on the internet, the things that people click on are the ones with the titles and captions that actually have the most. But it is an interesting point. We talk about perception, and specifically with moral injustice, because I think what we're all saying is like, look, we've all got our own callings, our own problems, our own things that we're using our time and energy and focusing on, right? And we've talked about this before, where we all have different value systems. We value things differently, and we have made decisions around those. Like, if you voted for Trump because maybe your number one value is you are against abortion, right? So if you're against abortion and that's your top value, then you voted for Trump. You didn't vote for Trump for any other reason outside of abortion because that was the most important thing to you. And similar with Kamala, you may have voted for her because your top is XYZ. So I'm curious, though, when it comes to moral injustice, how do you determine and when do you engage? How do you determine severity, and are you more likely to engage in that? Because, I mean, if you look back through history, like seeing someone being treated a different way or a group of people, like moral injustice, there's almost like this like chivalrous thing of like, that's not okay.
That's, I think, in today's day and age with all the misinformation out there and all the agendas out there, it is so hard. And that's the risk, right? Like I'll I wouldn't say contradict, but I'll offer a counterpoint to what I had said earlier, which is you can't just sit on the sidelines indefinitely and claim ignorance, right? I think that's the balance here is, when can you engage? At what point do you have enough information to suggest it's enough of a problem that you need to engage and do something about it? And that for me is the problem I have not figured out how to solve. I just find it incredibly difficult to become accurately informed on any given topic in today's day and age. Now, I think it's obvious when it's obvious, right? If someone takes a stand on an issue, or you're going to go to a bar and there's a sign on the outside that says, white males over 45 or, between the ages of 30 and 65, or blacks are not allowed or whatever, like that is obviously at least within that community or for that particular, that's an obvious thing. But where you have these specific situations that are being perpetrated and or being suggested implicitly to be representative, a sampling representative of the broader population of a particular profession or particular, situation. That's where I just think it's so hard now to figure out. I wish I had a better answer.
We talked a lot about, I think in a prior episode, we talked about government, right? We talked about where we thought government should lie. And I think the majority of us thought it should be, a lot of things should be handled on a more local level. And I think potentially that is where the ability to exact change is probably the most pertinent. Like you should be engaging in that because there's more of a chance that you have the right perspective on something, somebody being treated poorly in a workplace. And I think that the further you zoom out, the more difficult some of these things. Again, it's the same thing you just said. It's much more difficult, I would imagine, for human resources to deal with something at a company of 50,000 people than it is for you guys. And we've all, I don't know what training you guys have your employees go through, but having gone through employee training at very large corporations, like some of it is wild. You're like, again, it kind of goes to, what do I call those? It's a result of social media, but like fear that's not real. Like you're talking about something that is so rare, but because we are not designed as humans to be exposed to this much information, again, I think to your point, most of what we see, if not all of what we see in the media, they're anomalies, relatively speaking. Yes.
At least we don't have proof otherwise.
Right.
While you're talking, it's just fascinating to me. It's like, is there a right perception? Or is there ever a correct perception? And how would you determine that? Because as I'm sitting here, I'm going to let you answer that. But like, if I have a perception on X and like, I have a perception on silver going to $1,000 an ounce, right? If you go up enough layers, or even in the marketplace, like investments, the people that make all the money in the markets, they can actually move the market.
Sure.
And so like their perception is way better than my perception because I'm looking at it down here and they're looking up here. Like, do you feel like, do we ever have any perceptions that are actually correct or maybe, and how would you even know?
I would say if they're grounded in moral factuality, and we talk a lot on this podcast about the Bible and some of the moral directives that are in there. Let's just say you use that as your guideline, right? Or like there are things I wonder, I think back, and it would be interesting to have somebody on here that's in their 90s or something like that, or in their 80s. But like you look back at some of what we perceive today as atrocities historically. And it would be very intriguing. I'm sure there's interviews out there to understand, was there a moral nagging? Like if you were a slave owner in whatever time, did you feel uneasy about that? Like, was there something that told you maybe this isn't right? I'm kind of doing it because it's, that's how you do things. This is who works for you. Did you justify it because you were giving them essentially food, shelter, and clothing, even though it wasn't to the level that you had it? It'd be really interesting to understand that. Because then, if that was the case, because I do look back historically and wonder when some of these things, again, that we perceive today as morally reprehensible, like was the desire for community and belonging so strong and falling in the line so strong that you just buried that inner wiring? Or was the perception so different because of the time that it just goes back to, is there a right perception or not, that they really thought that, oh, this is the way to do things.
Yeah.
Slavery's been around for thousands and thousands of years. This is just how you do it.
I don't think there's a right or wrong perception, but I think there's a spectrum. I don't think there's a point on the spectrum that's like, okay, right or wrong. I think there's a spectrum of informed perceptions versus less informed, more informed versus less informed perceptions based on factual evidence or culturally or societally agreed upon foundations. For example,
Factual evidence, by the way, is a increasingly more difficult statement.
sure, it is. Yeah. I mean, we've been talking about that. I mean, what is reality? Is this
I would love to hear one perception that's like that you're strongly about.
You can be less or more or less informed. I think meaning if you get more information, for example, about this ICE situation, if you're going out and you're doing surveys and discovery sessions and you are interviewing the right cross section of people that don't have maybe implicit biases or getting perception from people on both sides, and you find that some of these videos that we're seeing that is what is collectively happening across the country. Then I think, based on that, you could develop an informed perception that A, this is what is happening, and then B, that it is wrong based on these premises. And I think that's variable too, right? So you need to be clear about, hey, I think this is wrong based on these 7 scriptures in the Bible that suggest that people are people and no one is above or below someone else. And Jesus' example of treating everybody equally, or however you want to characterize that, I think you can have more or less informed perceptions for sure.
It's,
I mean, I'm not sure I can make one statement at this moment or I'm comfortable from a perception standpoint. I think back to the Bible, and it's been interesting because we're going through Hebrews 11 together, and it's basically a historical documentation of all of the ancient people within the Bible. And the perception is you're Moses, you're Noah, you're Cain and Abel, you're Joseph. Like, these are really good, godly, fearing people. But the reality is when you go back and read about it, these guys were just wild. They were killing Cain and Abel. They're the sons of Adam and Eve. Obviously, Cain killed Abel. I mean, Joseph was sold off by his brothers. And even when he went to work for Pharaoh and finally got into the position he was in, he honestly helped the Pharaoh take everything from the Israelites through trading them the grain that they stored up, took their land, their possessions, took it all. And Moses was radical, right? So like the perception is like, man, I wish I could be like these guys. But when you actually go to your point, you start learning about some of the stories, and even Abraham sleeping with
Abraham and Isaac, yeah,
and then
Ishmael and
Isaac stole a blessing. No, Jacob stole Isaac's blessing, and Abraham slept with his wife's mate. Like, all these people, as people, were humans and made all these different things. But when we just think about the Bible, like, oh man, these people were. So I think to your point a little bit, why I bring all that up is to more say, well, the more facts you can pull in, you can make a better, you can create a better perception of what it was really like potentially. But also, like, your initial perception, even historically, may be wildly off too, based on getting the cliff notes. Like Abraham Lincoln was, he did some really great things, but he did some really bad things too. And so there's just like, I think we struggle to get the historical facts, to your point, to get those right, to get current facts right. And then I feel like someone's always going to have more information to perform a better perception, which makes me feel inadequate to have a perception at all.
I remember. So yeah, and there's always this like continued zoom out. Like, we'll take, for instance, and I love this. Again, I've mentioned it ad nauseum, but I have a very nice purview of both sides of the aisle based on historical geographical locations. And so, like, it's been a while now, but when the woman was shot in her car, and one side, and I don't believe anybody should be murdered. So regardless of why that happened or how it happened, not good. One side is taking this video, and they're showing you 17 angles of exactly what happened, and they're trying to quantify whether or not it was justified. And that's like their, I guess, their method of communication. That's their piece of media. Well, then the other side zooms out, and there's more context apparently to the story. This lady was blocking traffic, and she was being aggressive, and she was being, and there was this whole like prequel to this happening that may have created unrest in the person that did that, because she was kind of, it was a tense situation prior to that happening. I'm not picking a side. Again, nobody should ever die. So let's make that statement. But my point is that like, we're so good now with 700 different angles on things, and because we're exposed to so many of the world's anomalies, that puts the ability to reason that it could have happened. I may have mentioned this before, but when our kids were young, Tara had this really strange fear that one of them was going to get tangled in the cord from the blinds and die, because she had like seen this on a Facebook post or some like the likelihood of that happening is probably 1 in 500 million. But because she'd seen that, she could justify it in her brain that, oh, that's possible. And now that we've experienced all these different anomalies throughout all of these different areas, there's a way, let's say hypothetically, to justify that guy doing that to that woman was justified. Like there's a way to do that because we've seen these things happen in the past. And it's again, going back to like the factual side of things, it's so difficult. I just listened to a podcast on aspartame. We have heard throughout most of our lives, especially when we were younger, that diet sodas cause cancer, right? Aspartame and all of those things and all of those chemicals, they cause cancer. You've heard people say that they still cause obesity, that they activate insulin, they do all these things. So I listened to this podcast, and this particular individual is obsessed with human randomized control trials. And he's like, they created this AI agent that examines PubMed and some other platforms that store medical scientific research. And he's like, if you search for the negative effects of aspartame, 60% come back that it could be harmful. 40% don't. But if you remove animal studies, it shifts. And if you account for human randomized controlled trials where there isn't a biases based, you guys have heard when people do studies on certain food tendencies, but they're doing their studies on people who eat McDonald's all the time, right? It's like, it's not, so anyways, it goes to 80-20 that it's not bad. And so my point is like, people see that, and for some reason we want to like latch on, Diet Coke's bad, it's cancerous, it's all this, that, and the other thing. But the more you zoom out and the more you learn, there are like 7 different tiers within that conversation that you could land on and think you were in the right. You do that initial research that includes the animal trials. You're like, see, I told you. Oh, but wait. Oh, but wait. Oh, but wait. And nobody wants to go that far to get to where they need to get to be that informed.
I think that's why it's in a spectrum, to your point. And it is. I think very few people want to go the distance to get a fully informed. Because even depending on that, the 80-20 may not necessarily be that it's proving it's not bad, but that there's no evidence that it is bad,
100%.
right? Which is a completely different statement. Trent, you asked for a perception that we could make that might be informed. I would say we could make a pretty informed statement that Trump's a narcissist. Like there is enough factual comments, evidence, whatever, that you could probably say. And again, this is a spectrum. I would say with some level of confidence, by the definition, Trump is a narcissist. That would be the perception that I would offer.
Hilariously, Jordan Peterson has a video out that speaks exactly against that.
That's great.
Well, the funny part about that is what if
I actually have heard
what if
also
this
a very
is
philanthropic guy.
Is a big show that he's putting on so that people think he's crazy and other countries are afraid of him. He's doing this stuff and the arrogance and all the stuff he says about self-promotion. But what if it's like deep down he's a very now again, this is a big what if, that he's doing all of this because he wants to it's part of an act that he's playing, right?
I think that's a
to get
potential
things wrong.
perception, but your what if suggests that it's probably less informed because it's just a hypothesis.
Well,
what if, right? Versus like we have seen him on many occasions, and to your point about, I have heard many people that interact with him personally. He's a very, very kind person. He is very philanthropic. He has tried to help people. He's not, again, trying to. So when I say narcissist, that doesn't mean they're just a horrible person, but they're very egotistical and just like they want their name on everything. They want to be the guy. They're calling the shots. I mean, it's a fairly safe.
Well, I think we've actually gotten this far and forgot or not mentioned the elephant in the room. You want to talk about speculation, wild speculation? Let's talk about the Epstein files. Holy cow. I mean, it is wild, some of the things that people are running with. And I'm not calling them right, wrong, or indifferent, but it's seems to be such a like skeleton of what would need to be there to be proving these things factual. It's almost doing a disservice to itself by there being so many documents, so much information, but like that is something that, I'll give you an example. I think you're all familiar with him, Peter Attia, right? We're familiar with Peter. Peter Attia is in the Epstein files 1,700 times. And it's almost all of it, or a large portion of it, is in direct communication with Epstein himself. And it's a very, and again, this is like very Cliff Notes, which is a bad thing, right? But like, very bro conversations. So there are references to things that you'd have in like joking with your homies that, given the context of what's going on, probably not the right stuff to joke about. But it's crazy. I mean, that's one, like, it's one thing to take a video of something that happened and push your agenda based on that. But to take these like very crude, very, sometimes one or two sentences in email form and like place judgment on, or judging right, wrong, or indifferent, how you're judging them. I think that's been fascinating to me.
I think people underestimate the brain's ability to create a conviction on reality. I remember listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and he had someone on who was basically saying that chicken and meat, any sort of like animal protein meat, is like, do you want to die by hanging or by gunshot? Like horrible, not good. And after you listen to that podcast, you're like, wow, I'm going to be dead tomorrow. Like, I've been eating meat, this is 1,000% causing cancer. I mean, the amount of statistics and studies and just the way this guy delivered this was unbelievable. And then Rogan had someone on 2 weeks later. I'm not getting these mixed. I think I'm getting these right, but there's a small chance I'm getting the two swapped. That basically suggested just the opposite. That like a small portion of meat, like on a consistent, regular basis, how that has proven to be a great source of nutrition and health, and from B12 to other things. And you listen to the first, and you don't even think there's a sliver of any other possibility of any other story. And then you listen to the other story and you realize, holy cow. And that's where I think the brain, there's probably many, many good reasons why the brain is wired to be able to do that, to be able to fill in the gaps and like get us so convicted about something. But I think we way overestimate the truth of what we're interpreting, and we don't realize how easy it is for the brain to fill in the gaps, or for people to manipulate studies and information to lead us down a path that isn't necessarily reality, and it may be even just a moderately informed perception.
So I hear you talk, mine goes to, what are the steps the brain needs to form certainty? Like, as you talk about, there's probably a psychological thing that we need facts, something to help us create certainty or belief, which informs our perception. and it's probably a science, and it's probably many people know how to do it. To your point, I can't tell you, there's been several times where I've done the same thing, where I'm so certain about something because I just listened to it, and then I hear the opposite, and I'm like, okay. Now, I generally walk away with one going one way or the other, but I've definitely seen doubt creep into something I was extremely certain about.
You hear that? Go ahead.
No, I think we probably utilize comparison. I think that's one of the elements is like, I talk about human randomized controlled trials when it comes to like a lot of these scientific studies. It's like, okay, if whatever this is has been tried in a controlled environment, it's probably more on the scientific side than it is anything to be able to develop like this factual stasis or base. But like, if it's been tried in a controlled environment on something that is like something else in more ways than not, then, and this result has been proven over and over and over again, then, it's like, I think the brain has the ability to let its guard down and potentially, look at that as factual.
Do you guys think perceptions are bad? Because I think one of the things is once you form one, it's a little bit of like egotistical bias, so it's not as easy to switch. But do you think they're bad? And if so, or if not, how do you lean into conversations?
I think with a humble inquisitiveness. I think curiosity, if everyone would just be a little more curious, we'd be in a much better world. Perceptions are necessary. They're absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we would all be in a paralytic state mentally trying to get every last piece of information about. I mean, you've seen those people. There have been times where I've been that person. But yeah, I think they're absolutely necessary. But I think if people, I heard this the other day, if people were just more curious, the amount of good that would do in the world would be very difficult to quantify. Everyone is just so sure of things that in reality are not factual.
Well, I think there's qualification there, but I think it's also about discernment, right? Because unfortunately now you can be curious and you can just spend 10 years going down the same rabbit hole. That's the other thing, right? Like now, because of the way things are, you can go and this goes back to another, thing the brain does. You can go as far to justifying. I mean, think about the people that still believe in flat earth. Like how far have they had to go down? I remember there was a movie done, a documentary, and it was with flat earthers. And there was this thing, and they were trying to prove the curvature of the earth. And it was like they went a certain distance, call it a couple of miles, and shot a laser. And they're like, well, if the earth is curved based on physics or based on the measurement of the earth, there's no way we'll be able to see the laser. There's no, whatever, 10 miles, whatever, super high powered laser. Well, they shot the laser and the earth was curved, and only 4 out of the 5 changed their mind. So like, now, and especially with the advent of AI, there's got to be some level of discernment. And that's what's kind of scary, because again, we're exposed to all these anomalies. We start to be able to justify things that are just so highly unlikely.
Here's a question for you. If your perception now is more informed and could be informed by AI, who's helping the AI form their perceptions? And we know some of it has to do with the way you prompt a question. Because if you ask something like, help me understand why this is the case, it will lean into that being the case more than others. But if your perception now is being formed by an AI agent.
Have you noticed that a lot of authors, I've listened to a couple books lately, and at the end of them, the authors are like, this is not to be used to train any large language models. Like, because a lot of it's self-fulfilling, right? Because yes, it's how you prompt it, but it's also trained on us. And who is us is a really big question. And so I think some of these authors are like, I don't want you to train on me. I'm not taking responsibility for 2 generations from now believing something's a particular way because they took whatever I said as gospel, which I think takes some real self-awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty well documented that every large language model has a bias, and they're going to have biases based on the information that's put in. I think the best thing you can do at this point is to have an awareness of it, of what is the bias. And it's going to depend on the society and the time when that information was fed and what that collective amount of information is. Obviously, the broader set of information that you get across societal time periods, across generations, across different cultures, like there's more of a diversity in there, and I think it gets a little less biased as you expand, but I think there's always a bias you have to be aware of.
Well, you want to talk about like fine-tuning perception now? I mean, it's getting so hard. I always felt like, I think most of us that use AI on a regular basis can suss out verbiage from AI pretty easily, most imagery pretty easily. But I saw one the other day. It was a lady in Ireland who had a bakery, and she had a picture on there with Brad Pitt. And it was split, like dead nuts. And I think it was real because he's in Ireland filming something right now. But it was like nobody knew. Like and again, it's inconsequential. It's a picture of a lady in a bakery with Brad Pitt, but we're really going to have to continue to fine tune our perceptions to navigate all this.
It's I would say human tendency and perception and the way we're fed information seems to be more drastic, more absolute. One thing I've noticed with AI is I feel like most of their responses are never absolute. Mm-hmm. It's always asking more questions. It's always being more thoughtful. And if AI becomes a co-pilot per se, not to steal Microsoft's terminology, but if it is a true co-pilot to everyone on the daily, will it round out our perceptions? Will it be a good thing to some extent?
I mean, it's still having, I was talking, so a buddy of ours did a film on Pizza Hut recently, right? And one of the elements of that film was who architected the original red roof design. And he asked AI 6 different ways who it was, knowing who it was, because he had like done some real hardcore research on the other side of it. And 6 separate times told him he was wrong. It's scary to think that it's still in that stage where it doesn't always, and that would seem to be something that it would know. I mean, that's a pretty iconic design, and to not be able to provide that information. Now, again, it could be prompted wrong, but having that be the thing that rounds out our perspectives on things, I don't know.
I think this is kind of like autonomous cars. They don't need to be perfect. They just need to be better than the human. And I would say large in part, the AI models are less biased and are probably going to be more well-rounded than most humans. And so I think in that regard, I feel like it is a good thing because I think it is offering, and everything can be abused. Everything can be used in a toxic manner. And we've already seen many examples of this of AI. But I think at its core, if it's used in the right manner, I think it can offer some additional perspective that is valuable.
What we talk about, though, and we've generalized who these people are, right? But we'll call them the fire starters, right? The ones that are the squeaky wheel, like you see on the different platforms. And they talk about it all the time. You hear them say, oh, it's not as bad as you think it is. It's just these handful of people that are really, really loud. Do you trust that those people are going to prompt in or engage AI in the right way? Probably not. So it could also, yes, if engaged in a neutral manner, probably does round out the human better. But it also makes the person with an agenda way more powerful.
People are always going to do bad things. They're going to use every tool provided to them to do bad things. But I've never seen in my prompting, when I'm generally inquisitive, being curious, I've never seen it come back with a post that I would say would be a fire starter. It always seems a little bit more like, well, here's some basic information. It'll ask another question, or it'll say, well, you might want to lean into this. Like, it always seems to have a flavor of a curiosity or a non-absolute, now I've never prompted it to be like, show me how I can post against this and be super negative and super condescending. And if you do that, maybe it'll spit stuff like that out. I'm not sure. But for those that are trying to perform a perception, and they're trying to be inquisitive about it, and they're coming into it from a stance of humility and trying to understand, it feels like AI is going to round people out a little bit better and make them think a little bit more.
I wasn't saying that the AI would be incendiary itself. I'm saying, like, if I want to defund the police, I go to AI and I say, can you tell me exactly X, Y, Z statistics to bolster my position? That's what I'm talking about.
You mentioned, I think everything that we say and do, we've got to be thoughtful about. I mean, you said AI will round people out and make them think a little bit more. I think the prevailing perception right now is that people are worried that AI will make people think less and stop thinking in like the neural networks that we develop through that. I forget, I had referenced or read something else that talked about how certain parts of the brain have seen drastically reduced activity in areas where technology has supplemented it. And I forget exactly what the example was. But that's going to be interesting. Do people use it to advance their thinking and round it out, or do they use it instead of?
I think we're using parts of our brain now for analysis and thinking that we've never used before. Think about how you analyze different forms of marketing and communication. You know, how creative people are getting with spam email and with other types of spam texts and with the mail you get in the mailbox. Like, that was a big thing. Like, how can I make this communication that I'm sending someone in the mail look like it was handwritten? How can I make this email? I mean, I'm sure both of you do, because I get a ton of them. These emails from different people looking to it. Who knows? Looking to engage. I mean, I get 2 or 3 emails a week about people who want to buy Liquipel. Like, come on. First of all, I'm not the guy. But like, they're spending time using AI to try to figure out how to articulate some of these things. And so it's like, we're having to use our brains a lot more now to analyze and to suss out communication that isn't legitimate. And it's not a skill set that everybody has. So I think we're thinking about things in different ways to be able to perceive the most true world.
It'll be interesting. We're the generation that's in the middle of it. So we're like, there'll be a time when there won't be the middle generation. It'll just be it. Like, you may have an AI thing that says, hey, any email you get that's AI generated, I don't want to see. And it'll filter it out. But when our kids are in this spot, it'll be something else. But like, we're the ones that are trying to compete with what's real, what's not, what we value, what we don't. But I think in 10 to 15 years, that skill set won't be there. They're growing up with ChatGPT. They're learning how to ask the right questions to dig into layers that we could never get to at that age. And so it'll be interesting to see how they grow with it.
Speaking of AI, one other perception, I actually read this, I thought this was super interesting, is that the mind, and this goes back to our natural ability to flock to the negative, but that the mind is much better at imagining what jobs won't be there and the chaos that will ensue versus the jobs that haven't been invented yet that will become much more prevalent as AI develops. And it's just another perception type thing that people are basically saying. There was a big article that came out. It's called Something Big is Happening, written by Matt Schumer. And he basically paints this doom and gloom picture that 50% of white collar jobs are going to be gone in 5 years. And like, it's coming, and he may be correct, right? But it was interesting because I think it played into that human natural desire to be like, here we go, chaos, panic setting in, versus kind of the shift of, yeah, we're going to lose some jobs, it's going to be disruptive, but this whole other wave of profession or ability is going to be needed to navigate this new world. But I thought that was interesting, that perception of that versus the reality of what the future is actually going to be like.
What's interesting about that is he's a programmer and basically saying that, you know, all the programmers are going to be not needed anymore. Well, 50 years ago, or maybe 70, there was tons of people in manufacturing. Robots came in, automated a lot. There was no programming jobs. Then this thing called tech came around, and then they hired hundreds of thousands of programmers, and now the programmers are going to become somewhat obsolete. And so it will be interesting, to your point, to see what is the next iteration of whatever we're going to need to survive as a human species and race. Because we go back to, it's like, at the end of the day, we're all looking for purpose, and we got to have purpose. Without purpose, I think we're going to be lost.
Well, how long and how much value are we going to continue to put on human generated anything? I think we've seen that in sport. We don't care about the Honda robot that can hit 1,000 threes in a row from the top of the key. For whatever reason, that just doesn't hit. I think Mr. Beast did a video a while back that had like 6 or 7 sports, and it had AI robots competing against humans. One was a pitcher, a couple were runners. It just doesn't click. So, I've said a couple times, when it comes to creative and or other things generated by AI, it just doesn't quite hit the same as something that a human has done. And I wonder.
This is my take, and this is probably for another podcast, but I think everything's going to be highly relational, and everything's going to be done by AI. I mean, all back end processing, comparison, technical contracts, almost everything can be done by AI, but the relationship side. So when people stop caring about interaction, when an AI agent at company XYZ can talk to an AI agent at insurance carrier XYZ, and they can figure out, they know each other's businesses well enough, and they can process all the insurance between the two AI agents, and they don't need a distribution channel and a broker. And the person that owns the company is comfortable with that, saying like, well, if something happens, I still think with an AI agent that 99% more accurate, or is going to be accurate compared to an independent insurance agent. And that when it happens, that the carrier is going to pay the claim, and I don't need an independent agent to be an advocate for us. Like, when the buyers become that comfortable with the AI responses, I think it's going to be challenging to figure out. And that's just in the insurance world. I mean, arguably, I think there's a lot of insurance companies that are billions and billions and billions of dollars that have all doubled down on the distribution channel of independent insurance agencies, because they know how hard it is to get the last mile to build relationships. When relationships stop mattering, I think the world changes at a whole nother level.
If you were to advise your kids to study a particular subject or two, or become really prevalent in a skill or two, like, what, outside of just general be relational and be able to connect with people, like, what do you think what could they be learning in school that is going to be relevant?
I don't see it. It's like how we talk about sports, right? They're not in, at this point in time, my son is not in soccer to be a pro soccer player. He's in soccer for all the other things. And I think you're right. From a relational perspective, it's like, put yourself in as many environments as you can, learn the values, establish the values that you get, the tenacity, the hard work, the problem-solving skills. All of those are going to come into play. I think it'll become much more clear to us when we have kids. Well, I mean, you do, but like when, it's getting closer. Maybe it doesn't become clear. I don't know where you guys are with Roman as he's getting kind of close to that end of that road. But I think it's all of the secondary things that they're getting to do right now that are going to be the most beneficial to them in the long term.
It's been a really interesting experiment with homeschooling Isaiah. And just recently we went, and he came with me to a company event, and we had 60 carriers and employees there, and he was going up and shaking hands and talking to people. I know you said be more specific than relational. We do this thing called Beast Academy that's very much, it's really interesting. It's problem solving, and it's different like things. And it's pretty fascinating, but I don't think there'll be anything more important than your ability to relate, to connect, and to build community. And I think you get that in school a little bit. I think you get it in sports a little bit, but your ability to foster and teach them how to build community and how to maintain relevance is going to be, I think, one of the most important skills. And my oldest is going to be he's a junior, and he's thinking about, he wants to be a lawyer, right? Well, contracts are going to be a thing of the past from needing someone to write and articulate. Now, there probably will be for the next couple of decades a need for people to still want to have a person to talk to feel comfortable about, to do that final review. And you may have, corporate attorneys, or maybe you become a specified attorney to where you're doing something very, very specific. But that's one of those professions that your bottom line attorneys aren't going to, the ones that just do basic things are not going to be, I think, as relevant as, but the ones in smaller communities may still be, because our generation still wants to talk to people at that level, I think.
Yeah. I think most of the skills that you could learn would be learned in like a trade environment, right? I mean, I think engineering is applicable still, because there are some, we've kind of talked about with like Dan, there are just some real world things that AI and some of that can't account for yet. So I think that's an element that will be necessary for a while longer, just because there's so much depth to some of those engineering problems.
The trades.
And the trades, yeah, I think those things will continue to be relevant.
Well, that was a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Perception versus reality. If you learned anything, you learned that you can't have a perception at all. They could all be wrong, but I think ultimately to be more curious, to ask more questions. There's a lot of different ways to look at something. And I don't believe you have to take on everyone else's, cross and the things that maybe align more on the moral and justice side. Those are things you may want to dig deeper into. So be open, communicate, ask questions, and we'll see you next time.